The night was supposed to be flawless. Los Angeles was buzzing with anticipation as the entertainment world gathered to celebrate Viola Davis, an actress whose career had redefined what it meant to break barriers on screen. She was being inducted into the Television Hall of Fame, a moment steeped in dignity, history, and triumph. The city's elite had turned out in shimmering gowns and tailored suits, ready to honor a woman whose performances had become part of television's cultural fabric. But in the middle of all that glamour and reverence, another name began to stir whispers across the red carpet: Meghan Markle. Her arrival was unexpected, uninvited by some accounts, and it immediately shifted the air in the room. What followed was not simply a clash of egos, but a stark collision between two very different narratives of fame, legacy, and belonging. This story begins with that quiet ripple that turned into an earthquake. At first, Meghan's appearance seemed like nothing more than another celebrity guest making a late entrance, but almost immediately, things turned tense. Guests exchanged looks, the press surged forward, and cameras clicked with the frenzy reserved for scandals, not celebrations. For those who witnessed it, the sight of Meghan being halted, spoken to by event staff, and eventually blocked from entering where Viola's closest circle was celebrating was almost surreal. Some whispered that security had been given strict instructions. Others claimed it was a decision made in real time, but the outcome was clear. Meghan Markle was denied access and soon after escorted away. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. To understand why this moment carried such explosive energy, you have to look beyond the surface of a single event. This wasn't just about a woman showing up at a Hollywood ceremony. It was about what Meghan represented, what she was trying to reclaim, and the fortress-like walls of an industry that wasn't willing to let her in so easily. Hollywood is a world of illusion, but it has its boundaries. And on this night, as Viola Davis basked in the culmination of decades of hard work, Meghan found herself on the outside looking in. The irony is hard to ignore. Meghan, once an actress who walked the very carpets she now seemed exiled from, stood in stark contrast to Viola, whose induction symbolized not only personal success, but a larger cultural milestone. Viola's journey had been one of relentless effort, talent sharpened through years of grueling performances on stage and screen. Meghan's journey, by contrast, had pivoted from supporting roles in television to the dazzling, yet complicated world of British royalty. And while her royal title gave her global visibility, it also put her under scrutiny that no Hollywood star could quite match. The question lingering in the air that night was not just why Meghan showed up, but why she was turned away. The beginning of this story pulls us into that image. Cameras flashing, Meghan's poised smile masking visible discomfort, security ushering her aside, while whispers carried through the crowd like wildfire. Was it humiliation? Was it justice? Or was it simply an inevitable clash between someone chasing relevance and a moment that wasn't hers to claim? The beginning frames Meghan not as a passive victim, nor as an unstoppable force, but as a figure trapped in the middle of two worlds, royalty on one side, Hollywood royalty on the other, without a solid claim to either. As we move deeper into the middle of this narrative, the backdrop of Meghan's history with Hollywood becomes impossible to ignore. Before she married into the House of Windsor, Meghan was an actress with ambition. She wasn't yet an A-lister, but she had carved out a space for herself on shows like Suits, building a reputation for being polished, professional, and hungry for bigger roles. To some, her departure from acting to marry Prince Harry looked like a fairy tale. To others, it looked like a calculated leap into the highest possible echelon of fame. But fairy tales don't always play out smoothly. Hollywood doesn't forget, and it doesn't always forgive. The Meghan who returned years later wasn't the same one who left. She now carried a reputation clouded by controversies, lawsuits, and accusations of exploiting her royal platform. And yet, her return to Hollywood has been consistent. Interviews with Oprah, high-profile appearances, a Netflix deal, and ambitious projects all underscored her determination to cement herself as more than just Harry's wife. But the industry she left behind had evolved, and her presence was met with skepticism. Insiders whispered that Meghan had burned bridges long before she became Duchess of Sussex. Some suggested she had alienated colleagues, others that she had built an image too tightly wound around her royal status. In short, Meghan's Hollywood comeback was already fragile. The scene at Viola Davis's induction wasn't just about one night. It was about whether the industry still had room for her at all. The tension lies here. Viola Davis, an actress whose journey from poverty to the pinnacle of television history embodied grit and artistry, versus Meghan Markle, whose story of reinvention was tied to institutions, privilege, and controversy. Hollywood has always valued narratives, and on this night, it was Viola's story that the industry wanted to celebrate. Meghan's appearance risked reframing that narrative, and Hollywood wasn't about to let that happen. The industry doesn't like distractions, especially at moments designed to honor one of its own. This middle section of the introduction is where the story expands beyond Meghan and Viola into something more universal. It asks, what does it mean to belong in Hollywood? Who decides who gets to stand in the spotlight, and who gets pushed aside? For Meghan, being blocked and thrown out wasn't just about this event. It was about the walls closing in on her attempts to define her legacy. For Viola, the silence was powerful. By not addressing Meghan's presence, she kept the focus where it belonged, on her achievement, her community, her history-making induction. By the end of the introduction, the threads of conflict are laid bare. Meghan, once embraced by Hollywood, now found herself in direct conflict with it. Viola, the rightful star of the night, stood tall, untouched by the chaos around her. And the guests, the media, and the millions watching from afar saw something larger than a celebrity snub. They saw a symbolic rejection. Meghan's attempt to align herself with Viola's triumph only highlighted the difference between them, between earned recognition and contested relevance. The end of this introduction leaves us with a haunting image. Meghan leaving under the watch of security, her expression caught between indignation and restraint, as Viola's name echoed in celebration behind her. The clash was quiet but devastating, not in physical violence, but in symbolic exclusion. And it poses the central question of this exposé. Was Meghan's blocking a personal insult, a professional rejection, or a cultural statement about who gets to claim space in Hollywood's most sacred moments? That question is where the story begins. And as the chapters unfold, the answers will reveal far more than one woman being stopped at an event. They will uncover a battle between reputation and reality, between legacy and ambition, and between two different definitions of what it means to truly belong. The Los Angeles night air was thick with anticipation, the kind of electric energy that only comes when the entertainment world gathers for something historic. Viola Davis's induction into the Television Hall of Fame wasn't just another glitzy Hollywood event. It was a moment decades in the making, a recognition of relentless dedication, artistry, and resilience. She had fought her way from humble beginnings to the very peak of her craft, a journey that inspired actors, audiences, and entire communities. Her moment was supposed to be one of undisturbed triumph. Yet, as the cameras flashed and the crowd buzzed, a ripple began to spread, a ripple that soon became a storm when Meghan Markle made her appearance. At first, it seemed like a simple arrival. Another familiar face stepping onto the scene. Meghan walked with the poise of someone who knew all eyes would be on her. Dressed impeccably, her expression carried the trademark composure she had learned in years of being dissected by the public. But beneath that calm exterior, tension simmered, and it didn't take long for it to spill into the open. Event staff moved in quickly. Security shifted their positions. The chatter among guests rose in hushed tones, and the glances exchanged across the room hinted at something unusual. It wasn't long before whispers confirmed what few could believe. Meghan had been blocked, stopped from entering the very space she expected to command. Why did this moment matter so much? Because it wasn't just a celebrity being denied access. It was Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, former actress, global figure, attempting to stake her claim once more in Hollywood's most exclusive circle. And the response she received was not red carpet reverence, but rejection. That image of Meghan halted at the threshold, her presence deemed unwelcome, struck deeper than any tabloid headline could capture. It was symbolic. It was telling. And it was the kind of rupture that begged for explanation. To understand the gravity of it, you have to remember where Meghan came from. Years before she became a household name, she was a working actress. Auditions, small roles, hustling between projects. She knew the grind. Suits gave her a breakthrough, a steady role that brought recognition, but not the kind of Hollywood clout reserved for A-list names. She was on the cusp, a rising player in a game that demanded not just talent but connections, alliances, and persistence. And then, everything changed. Meghan's marriage to Prince Harry didn't just alter her personal life. It transported her into an entirely different category of fame. She was no longer just an actress. She was global royalty. That shift gave Meghan visibility beyond what any role could provide, but it also created a chasm. The Hollywood she left behind was not the Hollywood she returned to. When she and Harry stepped away from royal duties and sought independence in the United States, Meghan aimed to re-enter the industry not as the actress she once was, but as a power figure. Deals with Netflix, Spotify, and public appearances became part of a grand rebranding. But Hollywood is a tricky terrain. It remembers, it judges, and it guards its gates carefully. This is where the middle of our introduction deepens the tension. On one hand, Meghan wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder with women like Viola Davis, women whose work had earned them legendary status. On the other, her re-entry into the world of Hollywood was being watched with suspicion. Was she there to support Viola, or was she there to reclaim the spotlight? That question lingered heavily in the minds of many who watched her step onto the scene. And when security blocked her, that question transformed into an answer. Hollywood wasn't ready to let her in on her terms. Viola Davis, in contrast, represented everything Meghan was striving to project but struggled to embody. Viola's rise had been about grit, artistry, and undeniable talent. Her accolades weren't products of alliances or controversy. They were products of work, of roles that carved their way into history. To honor Viola was to honor perseverance itself. Meghan's attempt to enter that space at that moment was seen, by some, as an intrusion. Not because she didn't belong in the world of entertainment, but because the moment wasn't hers. The imagery of that night became unforgettable. Viola receiving applause and reverence. Her name etched into the Hall of Fame alongside television's greats, while Meghan's presence sparked whispers, hesitation, and ultimately rejection. For observers, it felt like a clash between authenticity and ambition, between legacy and reinvention. And the deeper question arose. Had Meghan underestimated Hollywood's boundaries? The end of this introduction forces us to grapple with those layers. Meghan leaving the venue, escorted discreetly yet visibly enough for onlookers to note every detail, became its own story. Some claimed her expression was calm, others said it betrayed flashes of anger. But what everyone agreed on was that she had been denied. Meanwhile, Viola's celebration went on undisturbed, her silence about the incident speaking louder than any statement could. It was as if the industry itself had drawn a line. Viola was being embraced for what she had built. Meghan was being reminded of what she could not claim so easily. By closing the introduction on this note, the stage is set for the chapters that follow. The night in question was not just about one confrontation. It was about deeper questions of power, recognition, and belonging. Meghan's attempt to insert herself into Hollywood's inner sanctum clashed directly with a night that was never hers, and the result left the world with an image difficult to erase. One woman celebrated as a legend, the other ushered out in silence. The red carpet has always been a stage of its own, a theater before the theater, where power is displayed not only through the stars who walk it, but through the way they are received. Viola Davis's induction into the Television Hall of Fame had drawn one of the most dazzling red carpets Los Angeles had seen that season. The night was warm, the flash of bulbs relentless, and the energy almost ceremonial. Reporters shouted names, stylists fussed over gowns, and every step of every celebrity was documented as though it were history itself. This was Hollywood in its purest form, polished, glittering, and controlled. Yet into that carefully choreographed scene, Meghan Markle appeared, and the divide began to show itself immediately. At first, there was no announcement, no official placement of her arrival. Meghan's presence hadn't been expected on the guest list in the same way as the industry veterans, the producers, and the actors who had been confirmed weeks in advance. She emerged as if to remind everyone that her stars still belonged in that galaxy, as though by walking onto that carpet, she could reclaim her place among the faces she once considered her peers. But Hollywood is a memory-driven place, And in the eyes of the photographers and handlers, her arrival was not a homecoming. It was an intrusion. The carpet had been planned to honor Viola. The lighting, the cameras, the energy were all aligned to focus on one woman's achievement. Now, here was Meghan, redirecting the lenses, forcing a narrative shift, even if only for a fleeting moment. The photographers, trained to chase the bigger story, turned their cameras toward her with instinct. After all, a disruption is as much of a headline as a celebration. Yet, the handlers in charge of the carpet moved differently. Where others were ushered along smoothly, Meghan was slowed, questioned, and then outright paused. This was the first sign of the divide. The cameras wanted her, but the event itself did not. Witnesses described the tension as almost cinematic. Meghan in her signature tailored look, maintaining a composed exterior, while event staff whispered into headsets, motioning to security with subtle but unmistakable signals. The carpet, which moments before had been an open runway of smiles and applause, suddenly became a barrier. For those who saw it firsthand, the discomfort spread like a shockwave. Guests looked on, unsure of whether to offer a smile of acknowledgement or to distance themselves entirely. Some avoided her gaze, others whispered behind their hands, and the unspoken truth became clear. This was not Meghan's night. It wasn't her space to command. The carpet, so often the symbol of belonging, was closing against her. This is where the idea of the red carpet divide becomes more than symbolic. On one side, Viola Davis, embraced by an industry she had spent decades shaping, her presence celebrated and protected. On the other side, Meghan Markle, whose ties to Hollywood were tenuous at best, now seen less as a peer and more as an outsider pressing against the gates. The carpet had become a line drawn not in velvet but in perception. Who belongs in the spotlight, and who does not? The atmosphere shifted palpably. Viola's entrance had been met with thunderous applause, shouts of congratulations, and chants of her name echoing through the crowd. Meghan's entrance, however, carried with it questions, doubt, and eventually confrontation. Why was she here? Who had invited her? And most importantly, would she be allowed to stand where the industry had chosen to enshrine one of its own? Security's role in this moment is telling. Typically invisible, blending into the backdrop of any red carpet, they suddenly became central. Their movements weren't hostile but firm, a choreography of prevention rather than celebration. Meghan was spoken to quietly, with gestures discreet but decisive. She wasn't being physically manhandled, but the message was unmistakable. This space was not hers to take. Guests nearby recounted the surreal contrast. Flashes still went off, the crowd still buzzed, but the focal point was no longer about joy. It was about exclusion. The divide became even clearer when members of Viola's team appeared on the carpet. Their expressions never broke from professionalism, yet the way they moved, protective, ensuring Viola's spotlight remained untouched, underscored the truth of the evening. This was Viola's night, not one to be overshadowed by controversy. For every step Viola took, applause followed. For every step Meghan attempted, hesitation met her. The red carpet had spoken, and it had drawn a boundary. And yet, this divide wasn't just about two women. It was about two narratives. Viola Davis stood as the embodiment of Hollywood's respect for endurance and artistry, a career marked by undeniable triumphs and sacrifices. Meghan Markle represented a different story, one of sudden elevation, of attempts at reinvention, of controversy and fractured alliances. When both narratives clashed on the carpet, Hollywood made its choice clear. The applause was for Viola. The whispers, the hesitation, and the blocking were for Meghan. By the time Meghan was stopped completely, the symbolism was undeniable. She stood poised, cameras flashing, yet unmoving, her path blocked, her presence contested. The carpet that had once lifted her as a young actress had now become the very ground that resisted her. Meanwhile, Viola moved forward, each flash of the camera celebrating a legacy built on merit and talent. The contrast was stark, the imagery unforgettable. The red carpet divide wasn't just about physical access. It was about perception, legacy, and the invisible lines Hollywood draws around who it chooses to elevate. For Meghan, the barrier was literal and figurative. For Viola, the path was clear, illuminated by the respect she had earned over decades. The divide had been drawn in public view, and the world had witnessed every moment of it. The red carpet is often described as a runway of dreams, but what many forget is that it is also a battlefield. Every smile, every pose, every stride across that stretch of fabric carries meaning, not just for the cameras, but for the industry itself. At Viola Davis's induction into the Television Hall of Fame, that battlefield came alive in a way no one expected. Viola's entrance had been planned with military precision. Her timing, her entourage, her stylist's final touches, everything designed to cement her as the star of the evening. And it worked. As she stepped onto the carpet, the atmosphere shifted instantly, becoming celebratory, almost reverent. She wasn't just walking into a ceremony. She was walking into history. Then came the disruption. Meghan Markle's sudden appearance fractured that perfect rhythm, creating two competing narratives on one stretch of carpet. On one side stood Viola, the embodiment of earned respect, her career having carved deep lines of permanence into television's legacy. On the other was Meghan, her reputation still polarizing, her motives questioned, her appearance perceived as an intrusion into a sacred moment. The carpet, in that instant, ceased to be neutral. It became a line of division. The choreography of the divide was visible to anyone paying attention. As Viola moved forward, staff cleared her path, ushering her into the spotlight with smooth, practiced gestures. Applause and congratulations rained down upon her. She had the carpet's full embrace. Meghan, however, found herself in a different dance. The staff around her did not open space, but closed it. The gestures were not celebratory, but cautionary. Security did not melt into the background. They leaned in, quietly but unmistakably. Photographers, torn between the scandal and the celebration, found themselves swiveling back and forth, their lenses capturing two stories that were now in collision. Eyewitnesses recall the silence that accompanied Meghan's pause. It wasn't the silence of awe. It was the silence of uncertainty. People didn't know whether to acknowledge her, whether to smile politely, or whether to pretend she wasn't there at all. For a woman used to commanding attention, it was an unusual, almost jarring response. Meghan maintained her composure, standing tall and smiling faintly, but even the most trained eyes could see that her posture betrayed a flicker of unease. What happened next turned the carpet into something more symbolic than ever before. A staff member, headset crackling with urgency, approached Meghan directly. The exchange was quiet, but those close enough caught fragments, references to credentials, to guest lists, to access. Meghan gestured with her hand, as if to explain herself, but the staff remained firm. This wasn't a debate. It was a decision. And with every passing second, the divide deepened. Viola continued forward into celebration, while Meghan lingered at the edge of denial. The irony wasn't lost on those watching. Meghan had once walked these carpets as an actress, not yet a duchess, and back then she belonged. Maybe not at the very top, but certainly within the crowd. She had been a familiar face, part of the machinery of Hollywood, even if not one of its brightest stars. Yet now, after years of royal elevation and global attention, she found herself more of an outsider than ever. The carpet that had once been a platform was now a wall. The conversation among guests reflected this tension. Some whispered that Meghan had no business being there, that the night was for Viola and Viola alone. Others speculated that Meghan had been invited but not welcomed, that her presence was technically permitted but practically unwelcome. And a few wondered aloud if she had come on her own accord, seeking to align herself with Viola's historic moment to reignite her own place in the Hollywood story. Whatever the truth, the optics were damning. The photographers, for their part, played both sides. They clicked furiously at Viola, capturing her grace and radiance, and then swung toward Meghan, snapping the awkwardness of her pause, the sharp lines of security standing beside her, the unspoken rejection playing out in real time. The divide wasn't just being witnessed, it was being documented, immortalized in images that would soon circulate far beyond the event. By the midpoint of this scene, the carpet itself felt like a metaphor for Meghan's larger struggle. Viola moved seamlessly forward, carried by the current of respect, embraced without hesitation. Meghan, by contrast, stood stalled, her path obstructed, her presence tolerated but not embraced. It was as if the industry itself was making a statement. You cannot simply walk back in. You cannot claim what you did not earn in this moment. And you cannot share in someone else's spotlight without consequences. As Viola posed for cameras, radiant and calm, Meghan's situation grew more visibly uncomfortable. Security leaned in closer, handlers gestured more firmly, and the whispers around her grew louder. Some said she had insisted on entering. Others claimed she attempted to bypass the carpet entirely, but the result was the same. Her forward motion was denied. The red carpet, normally a stage of triumph, had become for her a stage of exclusion. By the time the situation reached its peak, the contrast was undeniable. Viola was being showered with praise, her induction celebrated as a historic milestone. Meghan was being quietly, but firmly, edged away, her attempt to share in that moment halted. It wasn't violent, it wasn't loud, but it was devastating in its clarity. Two women on one carpet, two narratives unfolding side by side, and only one being embraced. The divide was not just physical, but symbolic. Viola Davis represented Hollywood's embrace of authenticity, of work that spoke for itself. Meghan Markle represented ambition colliding with perception, an attempt at reinsertion that the industry was unwilling to validate. The carpet became the stage upon which this contrast played out, and for those who witnessed it, the message was unmistakable. As Meghan finally turned, guided discreetly but firmly by security, the cameras followed her, capturing the moment she left the spotlight. Her departure was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no scene, but it was powerful in its silence. The carpet had spoken, and it had spoken against her. Viola remained, celebrated, immortalized, the rightful focus of the night. Meghan, meanwhile, had been shown the invisible boundary between belonging and rejection. The red carpet divide, then, was more than an incident. It was a declaration. Hollywood, on this night, had drawn its line, and Meghan Markle found herself on the wrong side of it. Meghan Markle's attempt to return to Hollywood has been one of the most fascinating and polarizing storylines of recent years. It is not simply the story of an actress trying to find her footing again in an industry she once called home. It is the story of a woman who has lived through two worlds, royalty and celebrity, and now struggles to reconcile the distance between them. Chapter 2 begins here, with the question that drives everything. What did Meghan really hope to achieve by showing up at Viola Davis's induction, and what does it say about her broader campaign to reclaim Hollywood? The truth is that Meghan's relationship with Hollywood has always been complicated. She was never an A-list star, but she had managed to build a respectable career. Suits gave her visibility, a steady paycheck, and recognition in certain circles. She attended parties, rubbed shoulders with producers, and worked with co-stars who praised her professionalism. Yet she was still just one among many aspiring actresses. The Hollywood ladder is brutal, and Meghan, though ambitious, was still climbing it when she made the choice that changed everything, marrying Prince Harry. Her marriage was viewed by some as the ultimate role, the chance to leapfrog years of struggle into instant global recognition. But in doing so, Meghan effectively severed ties with Hollywood. She abandoned auditions, she left behind the pursuit of acting roles, and she stepped into a world of tradition and duty that had no place for casting calls or red carpets. The palace became her stage, the monarchy her new production. For a while, it worked. The fairy tale captivated millions, and Meghan became one of the most recognizable women on the planet. But Hollywood is not a forgiving place, nor is it one that waits. While Meghan was building her life as a duchess, others were building careers, taking roles, and becoming icons. By the time she and Harry stepped down from royal duties and moved to California, the Hollywood she had once known had moved on. Faces that were once her peers had advanced, and new stars had risen. Meghan's attempt to re-enter that world was not greeted with open arms, but with skepticism. Was she truly coming back as an actress? Or was she entering as royalty, seeking a stage to control her own narrative? The deal she struck seemed to answer that question. The Netflix agreement, reportedly worth hundreds of millions, was not about acting. It was about producing, about telling stories, about curating content that reflected her worldview. The Spotify deal followed a similar pattern. Meghan and Harry were not returning as entertainers, but as brand builders. Yet, even these deals came with mixed reception. Critics said their projects lacked depth, audiences questioned their authenticity, and insiders whispered that Meghan's vision for Hollywood dominance was clashing with reality. Showing up at Viola Davis's induction, then, wasn't just about celebrating another actress. It was a strategic move. Viola represented everything Meghan wanted Hollywood to see her as: powerful, respected, trailblazing. By aligning herself with Viola's moment, Meghan may have hoped to remind people that she, too, had walked this road, that she deserved a seat at the table of women who had made history on screen. But intention and reception are two different things. To many in Hollywood, Meghan's presence was not seen as solidarity, but as opportunism. The night wasn't hers, and yet she was attempting to make it hers. This is where Meghan's return attempt becomes so precarious. In Hollywood, reputation is currency. You can buy influence, you can negotiate deals, but you cannot fake respect. And respect is what Meghan has struggled to secure. Every move she has made since returning to California has been dissected through the lens of her royal exit. Was she truly interested in producing meaningful content, or was she chasing headlines? Was she committed to using her platform for others, or was she obsessed with controlling her own image? The Hollywood elite have long memories. Some recall Meghan's early days when she was seen as ambitious to the point of alienating those around her. Others have never forgiven her for what they see as abandoning her roots in pursuit of royal privilege. Her attempts to walk back into their world with the authority of a duchess rather than the humility of an actress rub many the wrong way. The Viola Davis incident crystallized this dynamic perfectly. Meghan wasn't there to play a supporting role. She arrived as though she were still a star in her own right. But Hollywood was no longer willing to treat her as such. And yet, Meghan's persistence cannot be ignored. Despite setbacks, despite rejection, she continues to appear, to push, to remind the world of her presence. In this sense, her return attempt is both admirable and tragic. Admirable because she refuses to disappear, tragic because every misstep seems to deepen the divide between her and the world she wants to rejoin. The more she insists on her place, the more Hollywood resists. What makes this struggle even more fascinating is the contrast with Viola. Viola Davis had fought tooth and nail for every opportunity, often against systemic barriers that seemed insurmountable. She had built her career slowly, brick by brick, until she could no longer be denied. Meghan, by contrast, had leapt from obscurity to global fame through marriage, and then tried to leverage that fame into Hollywood influence. To many, the comparison was unfair. Meghan's presence felt like a shortcut attempt in the very moment meant to honor long, grueling work. In the middle of this chapter lies the heart of Meghan's dilemma. She is too famous to return as an ordinary actress, but not respected enough to be embraced as a Hollywood power player. She exists in a liminal space, neither fully royal nor fully Hollywood. Her return attempt is not simply about acting or producing. It is about identity. Who is Meghan Markle now, and where does she belong? That question remains unanswered, and the events at Viola's induction only made it louder. By the end of this chapter, the stakes are clear. Meghan's Hollywood return is not just a matter of deals or appearances. It is a battle for acceptance, for validation, for a place in an industry that measures worth differently than royalty does. Viola's induction highlighted the gap between legacy and ambition, between authenticity and reinvention. And Meghan's attempt to insert herself into that narrative, only to be blocked, exposed just how fragile her Hollywood campaign truly is. To truly understand the depth of Meghan Markle's Hollywood return attempt, we have to step back and look at her trajectory before she ever became Duchess of Sussex. In the early days, Meghan's career was like that of thousands of aspiring actresses in Los Angeles: small auditions, background work, hustling for guest appearances on shows that might never amount to much. She had determination, no question, but she wasn't a name that turned heads. For nearly a decade, she existed in the margins of Hollywood, known more for persistence than for stardom. When Suits came along, it was a breakthrough, but even then, Meghan wasn't its leading face. She was a supporting player on a cable show that, while successful, was far from the mainstream dominance of network hits or blockbuster films. What Suits gave her, however, was visibility. It put her on red carpets, it connected her with industry professionals, and it allowed her to begin branding herself as something more than just another actress. Meghan leaned heavily into causes, charity work, and appearances at events that were less about entertainment and more about influence. This was the foundation she would later expand upon when she married into the royal family. But in doing so, she skipped the years of grinding advancement that Hollywood often demands. She left the industry before she could test her staying power as a true leading lady. That departure is the very thing that makes her return so contentious. Hollywood remembers who puts in the work and who leaves when greener pastures appear. When Meghan reemerged years later, she came back with global recognition, but not the kind Hollywood values most, recognition tied to craft. She was famous, yes, but famous as a royal, not as an actress. This is the crux of her dilemma. She wants to be taken seriously as a storyteller, a producer, a creative voice, but her fame is inseparable from her title and her controversies. For some in Hollywood, that dissonance is too great to ignore. The Netflix deal was supposed to change everything. Announced with enormous fanfare, it painted Meghan and Harry as a couple ready to reshape the entertainment landscape. Documentaries, scripted projects, animations, all were promised. Yet, as time passed, the deal revealed more cracks than triumphs. Projects were announced, then quietly shelved. Content was produced, but it didn't generate the cultural dominance expected from such an investment. Critics began to whisper that Meghan and Harry had overpromised and underdelivered. And in Hollywood, whispers travel fast. Her appearance at Viola Davis's induction has to be seen through that lens. Meghan didn't just show up for a celebration. She showed up as someone desperate to remind Hollywood that she was still part of the conversation. She aligned herself with Viola's moment, perhaps believing that proximity to greatness could reinforce her own status. But the very act of showing up without clear purpose or invitation was seen by some as validation of her critics' view, that Meghan was less interested in honoring others and more interested in attaching herself to events that would keep her name in circulation. The unspoken rule in Hollywood is that legacy cannot be borrowed, it must be built. Viola Davis had built hers through decades of labor, roles that tested her, performances that transcended the screen. She was being celebrated because her work had forced the industry to reckon with its own limitations and biases. Meghan, in contrast, was attempting to remind the same industry of a relevance that was not tied to artistry but to status. That distinction mattered deeply in this moment. And here lies the emotional weight of Meghan's Hollywood return attempt. There is something undeniably human about her persistence. To be rejected by an industry you once belonged to and still insist on re-entering requires resilience, even if that resilience is misunderstood. Meghan's determination to carve out a place for herself is, in some ways, admirable. But the tragedy is that every time she tries, the reaction seems to confirm her exclusion. Instead of building sympathy, these moments often amplify the perception that she is forcing her way into spaces not meant for her. There is also the matter of trust. Hollywood insiders operate on relationships, and Meghan's network within the industry has always been fragile. Stories of her ambition, her exacting standards, and her ability to cut ties quickly have left some wary of her return. The Netflix and Spotify struggles only compounded this. When you show up at an event like Viola's induction, the industry does not just see the person, they see the narrative. And Meghan's narrative, fairly or unfairly, is that of someone trying to leverage rather than contribute. The ending of this chapter leaves Meghan in a precarious place. She is too famous to fade into obscurity, but not yet trusted enough to be welcomed fully back. She cannot return to Hollywood as the actress she once was, nor can she command it as the duchess she became. She is caught between worlds, and her attempt to insert herself into Viola Davis's night revealed the tension of that limbo. The Hollywood return attempt, then, is not simply about a woman trying to work again. It is about identity, belonging, and the battle between perception and ambition. Meghan wants to be remembered for her contributions, but Hollywood remembers the exits, the controversies, and the attempts to re-enter without the work that others endured. Viola Davis's induction wasn't just a reminder of what Hollywood celebrates. It was a mirror showing Meghan what she lacks in its eyes. The night of Viola Davis's induction into the Television Hall of Fame was a defining moment, not just for her, but for the entire entertainment industry. Hollywood, an industry long criticized for exclusion, had come together to honor a woman whose career symbolized the very opposite. Viola's story was not one of shortcuts or sudden bursts of luck. It was the story of perseverance, raw talent, and a determination so unshakable that the barriers in her way eventually crumbled. This chapter is about her moment, the one she had earned through decades of resilience, and why the industry saw it as sacred. When Viola first stepped onto the red carpet that evening, the energy shifted palpably. Photographers, who had been shouting names all night, fell into a rhythm of excitement that felt less like obligation and more like genuine celebration. Viola wasn't just another celebrity arriving. She was a force, a legend being recognized in real time. She carried herself with dignity, her gown understated yet elegant, her smile wide but calm, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. Every flash of the camera, every shout of her name, was a small acknowledgement of the path she had carved in a world that was never designed to embrace her so easily. The Television Hall of Fame is not given lightly. It is reserved for those whose contributions are woven into the fabric of the medium, those who have changed it, challenged it, or expanded its reach. For Viola Davis, the honor meant more than just professional recognition. It meant validation of a journey that began far from Hollywood's bright lights. Born in South Carolina and raised in poverty in Rhode Island, Viola's path was one of obstacles that could have ended her dream before it ever began. But instead, those obstacles became the furnace that forged her resilience. Every rejection, every stereotype, every door slammed in her face only sharpened her resolve. Her career was marked by roles that refused to conform to expectations. She didn't settle for caricatures or stereotypes. She demanded depth, demanded humanity, demanded roles that showed women, especially Black women, as complex, powerful, and fully human. From her early days on stage, where she won a Tony for her work in King Hedley 2, to her breakout film role in Doubt, Viola demonstrated an intensity that was impossible to ignore. Audiences didn't just watch her perform. They felt her, lived inside her character's pain, their triumphs, their struggles. By the time How to Get Away with Murder premiered, Viola had become a household name. As Annalise Keating, she shattered television conventions. She was unapologetically flawed, deeply layered, brilliant, yet broken. It was the kind of role that not only redefined her career, but redefined what television could be. For the first time, a Black woman led a major network drama in a role that wasn't watered down, wasn't safe, wasn't a stereotype. It was revolutionary, and it changed the industry. The induction into the Hall of Fame was the culmination of that journey. It wasn't just about her talent. It was about the doors she had opened for others. Viola's career had made space for new voices, for new stories, for representation that had long been denied. That night, when her name was announced, it wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for every young actor of color watching, for every aspiring storyteller who had been told they didn't belong. It was proof that they did. The room understood this, which is why the atmosphere was so charged. Colleagues, friends, and even rivals stood to applaud her. Her peers knew how hard the climb had been, how relentless she had been in her pursuit of authenticity. To celebrate her was to celebrate the struggle itself. And that is why the moment was so carefully protected. This was not a night for distraction, for gossip, or for controversy. It was a night to honor a woman who had carried the weight of an entire industry's biases on her back and still risen above them. When Viola took the stage to accept her honor, the emotion was visible. She spoke not just of her own journey, but of the journeys that had intersected with hers, the mentors, the co-stars, the audiences who had allowed her to tell their stories. Her voice carried the same gravitas that had made her roles unforgettable, and for those watching, it was a reminder of why she was there. She didn't beg for validation. She embodied it. She didn't have to justify her place. The work had already done that. In the context of Meghan Markle's disruption, the contrast was glaring. Viola's moment was about substance. It was about decades of undeniable work, about a body of art that could not be erased or ignored. Meghan's presence, on the other hand, was about perception, about image, about trying to attach herself to an event she hadn't built toward. That's why the industry responded the way it did. The divide wasn't personal. It was about protecting Viola's sacred space. The induction ceremony itself was steeped in reverence. Speeches from her peers highlighted not only her talent, but her integrity, her mentorship, her ability to uplift others even while fighting her own battles. Clips of her most iconic performances played across large screens, reminding everyone of the breadth of her work. The applause was thunderous, the respect unanimous. For once in Hollywood, the narrative wasn't fractured by scandal or controversy. It was united around a singular figure who had earned every bit of recognition. For many, seeing Viola honored this way was emotional. She represented what so many hoped for in the industry, the idea that talent, perseverance, and authenticity could still triumph. Her name joining the ranks of the Hall of Fame was more than symbolic, it was corrective. It told the world that despite Hollywood's flaws, it was capable of recognizing true greatness when it saw it. By the time the ceremony ended, Viola had secured her place not just in Hollywood's history, but in its conscience. She was a reminder of what the industry could be at its best. And that is why any attempt to overshadow her moment was met with resistance. The industry had drawn its boundary that night, not because it wanted to humiliate anyone, but because it needed to preserve the sanctity of Viola's achievement. This chapter, then, is not just about one woman being celebrated. It is about the meaning of legacy in Hollywood. Viola Davis's induction was a declaration that legacy is built on work, on sacrifice, on truth. And it is why her moment will be remembered long after the whispers of that night have faded. The security showdown was the moment when whispers turned into spectacle, when everything that had been simmering beneath the surface suddenly became visible to everyone present. Up until this point, Meghan's arrival had been a ripple, an unexpected guest, a set of curious glances, a pause in the flow of the red carpet. But when security stepped forward, the ripple turned into a shockwave. It wasn't loud or violent, but it was unmistakable. Meghan Markle, a woman used to commanding the spotlight, was being told she could not proceed further. For Hollywood, which thrives on control and image, this was the kind of rupture that no one could ignore. The choreography of the incident began subtly. A pair of security officers, dressed in suits that allowed them to blend with the crowd, shifted positions. Their earpieces glinted faintly under the lights as they angled toward Meghan. One moved to her left, another slightly behind her, not in an aggressive way, but in a posture of containment. Event staff with clipboards, often overlooked at these glamorous occasions, suddenly became central figures. They leaned in, whispered quickly, exchanged glances, and then gave a nod that was both decisive and final. The message was clear. She was not permitted to go further. For those standing nearby, the atmosphere was surreal. Here was Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, standing on a red carpet and being told she had no access. The flashes of cameras didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. Photographers knew instinctively that something unusual was unfolding. They captured the stillness of her expression, the faintly forced smile that betrayed tension, the way her hand shifted toward her clutch as if to anchor herself. Security didn't touch her, but their proximity spoke volumes. She was being contained, her movement restricted, her presence redirected. Witnesses describe her attempting to explain herself. Meghan leaned slightly toward one of the staff members, speaking in measured tones. Her hand made a small gesture, the kind people use when trying to assert calm authority. But the staff member's response was professional, unyielding. He shook his head subtly, glanced toward the entrance, then back to the security officers. Whatever Meghan was saying, it was not changing the decision. The rules of the event had been laid down, and she was not exempt. The contrast with Viola Davis's entrance was sharp. Only moments earlier, Viola had been guided forward seamlessly, the carpet practically unfolding before her. Applause had followed her every step, and security had acted not as enforcers, but as protectors of celebration. Meghan, in that same space, was being guided in the opposite direction. The carpet that welcomed Viola was resisting Meghan. The guests nearby responded in different ways. Some turned their attention away, unwilling to be seen staring. Others whispered furiously, their eyes darting back to catch every movement. A few celebrities, caught between curiosity and discomfort, pretended to busy themselves with conversations that had no substance, all while sneaking glances at the unfolding scene. In Hollywood, everyone knows the cameras are always watching, and no one wanted to be caught reacting too strongly. The symbolic weight of this security showdown cannot be overstated. For Meghan, being stopped by security was not just about access, it was about rejection. She had lived years under the protection of royal security, shielded from the world by layers of authority. To be on the other side of that, to be the one contained, the one denied, was an inversion that must have cut deeply. For Hollywood, it was a statement that even global fame has limits when it collides with the sanctity of an event meant for someone else. Observers noted how Meghan's demeanor shifted in those moments. At first, she maintained the calm poise she had perfected under years of scrutiny. But as the exchange dragged on, her expression grew tighter, her smile thinner. She nodded at one point, as if acknowledging what she had been told, but her body language betrayed unease. The cameras caught every flicker, her glance toward the photographers, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her shoulders squared against the rejection. Security eventually began guiding her away, not forcefully, but firmly enough that the message was undeniable. Meghan didn't resist, but she didn't retreat with ease either. She walked slowly, her head held high, her steps deliberate. It was the walk of someone refusing to appear defeated even as the reality of the situation was clear. The photographers followed her departure, their shutters clicking furiously, capturing an image that would soon dominate headlines. Meghan Markle being escorted out of a Hollywood event meant to celebrate another woman's triumph. The silence that followed her removal was almost eerie. Conversations resumed, the carpet regained its rhythm, and Viola's night continued as if nothing had happened. But for those who witnessed it, the moment was unforgettable. Hollywood had drawn a line in real time, in front of cameras, in front of guests, in front of Meghan herself. And that line was enforced not with words, but with the quiet, unyielding presence of security. The broader meaning of the showdown is what makes it so gripping. It was not about Meghan as an individual so much as what she represented. She embodied ambition, reinvention, and controversy, all colliding with an industry determined to protect its chosen narrative. Security acted not only on behalf of logistics, but on behalf of symbolism. This was Viola Davis's night, and nothing, not even Meghan Markle, would be allowed to overshadow it. By the end of the showdown, Meghan was gone, but the image lingered. Guests replayed it in hushed conversations. The media framed it as a dramatic snub, and the industry absorbed its implications. The night had been meant to enshrine Viola Davis into television history, but it had also produced a stark reminder of Hollywood's boundaries. Fame alone does not grant access. Status alone does not secure belonging. Respect is not transferable, and legacy cannot be borrowed. The security showdown will be remembered as the moment when Meghan's Hollywood return attempt collided directly with the industry's unspoken rules. She had tried to step into a space reserved for another, and the industry had responded with firm, visible resistance. It was a message written not in words, but in actions, captured forever in photographs and in the memory of those who saw it. Hollywood has always been built on two levels of communication: what is said in front of cameras and what is whispered in private. The whisper network, invisible but powerful, is where reputations are solidified, opportunities are shaped, and decisions are made long before they ever appear in the public eye. In the aftermath of Meghan Markle's appearance at Viola Davis's induction, the Whisper Network went into overdrive. To the public, it looked like an embarrassing moment of exclusion. To insiders, it became a litmus test, a piece of gossip too explosive to ignore, and a case study in how the industry truly operates when someone attempts to re-enter its tightly guarded circles. From the very moment Meghan was seen being halted by security, texts began flying between executives, publicists, and agents. Hollywood thrives on control, and when something unplanned happens at a carefully curated event, it raises immediate questions. Who allowed her to come? Was she invited? Or did she appear without proper clearance? Did she hope to attach herself to Viola's moment to create her own headlines? These questions weren't just idle chatter. They were whispered calculations, assessments of whether Meghan was someone to align with or avoid. The whispers didn't stop with logistics. Almost instantly, old stories resurfaced. People who had worked with Meghan during her acting days recalled moments of ambition that bordered on ruthless. Former colleagues repeated anecdotes about her being selective in relationships, calculating in how she positioned herself socially. Others pointed out that even before she married into royalty, Meghan had a reputation for carefully curating her image. In Hollywood, where authenticity is currency, such stories take on a life of their own. The Whisper Network thrives on them, and Meghan's latest attempt at insertion only fueled the fire. One of the most telling aspects of these conversations was the way people framed Meghan's motives. Few believed she was simply there to celebrate Viola. The consensus, whispered behind closed doors, was that she wanted to be seen, photographed, and connected to the night's headlines. In an industry obsessed with optics, such a move was read as opportunistic. While outsiders might sympathize with Meghan for being blocked, insiders saw it as another example of her inability to understand Hollywood's unwritten rules. Some nights are sacred, and attempting to redirect them is a mistake. The Whisper Network also began to weigh her viability as a Hollywood player moving forward. Publicists questioned whether associating with her would bring prestige or controversy. Executives debated whether she could deliver projects that would justify the massive deals she and Harry had signed. Producers quietly noted that her name generated clicks, but not necessarily respect. These whispers matter because in Hollywood, deals are not only made in boardrooms. They are made in conversations over dinner, at private parties, in the backrooms of award shows. If the whispers turn negative, doors close without explanation. There was also the matter of comparison. Viola Davis represented everything Hollywood wanted to celebrate: authenticity, hard work, representation, artistry. Meghan, in contrast, was increasingly seen as someone leveraging fame rather than building it through the industry itself. The whispers turned into cautionary tales. Don't try to steal a moment that isn't yours. Don't underestimate the industry's memory. Don't confuse global fame with Hollywood clout. People began to use Meghan's incident as an example of how not to play the game. Perhaps the most damaging whispers were about intent. Some insiders suggested that Meghan had specifically chosen this event because of Viola's stature, hoping that proximity to an icon would transfer credibility to her own brand. Whether true or not, the perception became reality in the Whisper Network. And in Hollywood, perception often matters more than truth. Once enough people began repeating the same narrative, that Meghan was seeking to hijack Viola's moment, it solidified into a kind of unspoken consensus. The network extended beyond executives and producers. Stylists, assistants, photographers, and even caterers all had their version of events. A single quip from someone on the inside could spread like wildfire, morphing as it moved, each retelling sharpening the angle against Meghan. Within hours, she was not just the woman who had been blocked at an event. She was the outsider who had tried and failed to assert herself into a narrative that did not belong to her. By the next morning, these whispers had shaped the headlines, ensuring that the media narrative aligned with what insiders had already decided. What makes Hollywood's Whisper Network so devastating is its permanence. Once a reputation takes root in those quiet conversations, it is almost impossible to erase. Meghan has already struggled with the perception that she and Harry overpromise and underdeliver, that they are more interested in appearances than substance. This incident deepened that perception. The whispers framed her as desperate, as disconnected from the reality of how the industry works, as someone who misunderstands the difference between being a royal figure and being a Hollywood insider. The irony, of course, is that Meghan has always understood the importance of narrative. She built her brand on controlling her image, on crafting her story. Yet, in Hollywood, control is rarely in the hands of the individual. It rests in the hands of the network, the endless chain of conversations that happen where cameras cannot reach. No matter how carefully Meghan may have planned her appearance, no matter what her intentions truly were, the whispers defined the meaning. They decided she wasn't there as a supporter, but as an opportunist. They decided her presence was a disruption, not an addition. And those decisions ripple outward, shaping the opportunities, or lack thereof, that will come her way. By the time the event concluded, the Whisper Network had already done its work. Meghan's exclusion wasn't just a single incident. It became a story that would follow her. It would be referenced in private meetings, repeated at parties, and eventually baked into the larger narrative about her Hollywood return. Meanwhile, Viola's name remained untarnished, her induction celebrated without controversy, her legacy protected. This is the brutal efficiency of Hollywood's whisper network. It protects those it chooses to elevate and erases or diminishes those it sees as threats or distractions. Meghan Markle's attempt to re-enter Hollywood collided head-on with this system, and the whispers ensured that she came out on the losing side.